What could have been?
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Of course, we're always free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And on today's show, we're going to talk about some players that Syracuse Basketball is interested in, the latest being Treysen Eaglestaff. But first, we're going to talk about Chance Westry entering the transfer portal earlier today. All that and more here on this edition of Locked On Syracuse. And before we get to that, today's episode is brought to you by the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Stay with us for the Armada Team of the Week later in the episode. Syracuse guard Chance Westry has entered the transfer portal. First on it was the portal report. Chance Westry is one of the big mysteries in Syracuse basketball history. Let's talk about the backstory of Westry, okay? He was a highly rated recruit in the class of 2022, and Syracuse was among the schools that were in on Chance Westry. However, he ultimately chose to go to Auburn as a true freshman, and in that true freshman season, 2022-23, Westry was limited to just 11 games due to injury. After that true freshman season, Westry decides to enter the transfer portal. Syracuse already had a relationship with him, and guess what? They get him in the portal. That was fantastic. Great news for Syracuse. High upside player that they got, and by all accounts, he was having an excellent camp ahead of the 2023-24 season, but right before the year started, Westry suffered a knee injury that would keep him out the entire year. So, Westry's first season was basically a wash at Syracuse. He did not play. We hoped that he would be able to contribute at least a little bit in 2024-25. Autry said before the year that Chance Westry was going to be healthy and ready to go. However, Chance Westry played a total of 3 games for Syracuse in 2024-25. And in those 3 games, he played a total of 11 minutes and scored, you guessed it, 0 points. So in total, Chance Westry spent 2 years at Syracuse University. He scored 0 total points and played just 11 total minutes. This was someone who was once a highly rated recruit, a highly rated transfer, but unfortunately, injuries have certainly taken their toll on Chance Westry. Of course, I wish him nothing but the best. It's unfortunate that it just did not work out with Syracuse. My guess, I said this earlier last week, I want to say, where I think he goes to a mid-major school. He's still got multiple years of eligibility, tries to get healthy, revamp his value, and perhaps rejoin the Power 5 in 2026-27. So once again, I wish Chance Westry nothing but the best. I don't necessarily blame him or anyone for the fact that it did not work out at Syracuse. Injuries are injuries, and they stink, quite frankly. They are the worst part of all of sports. What if Chance Westry was healthy? What are your thoughts on Chance Westry hitting the portal? Let me know in the comments section below. So now, with Chance Westry in the portal, what's next for Syracuse basketball? Well, they have 4 total players now in the transfer portal, and we'll go in order here, okay? Kyle Cuffe, Chris Bell. Side note on Chris Bell, he's already generating some interest, particularly from West Coast schools in the ACC. So I would not be surprised if Chris Bell returned to the Dome in 2025-26. Oh, that's going to be fun. Choppa also entered the portal, and then you have Chance Westry. None of these 4 losses are really all that surprising. TBD on whether or not they end up being impactful losses. Certainly, Choppa kind of puts that fear into you, where if he really improves next season and the season beyond, we'll be asking what if Syracuse had stuck with Choppa. In theory, all 4 of these players are allowed to return to Syracuse, because when you enter the portal, you can always withdraw from the portal. An example from last year was Jamir Watkins at Florida State. Jamir Watkins entered the portal. He, I guess, fielded some offers and ultimately decided to return to Florida State last season. So they can come back. However, I would not expect that any of the 4 players for Syracuse that have entered the portal to come back to Syracuse, and none are really that surprising. If you just think about it logically, Kyle Cuffe, the only reason why it was surprising was because of the way in which he entered the portal, planning on coming back, but decided to renege on that. But when you look at the roster, it makes sense. Chris Bell, the writing was kind of on the wall. Elijah Choppa more, it's a playing time thing. And Chance Westry, it just feels like he needs to go to the mid-major school, revamp his value. Now, with that being said, there's the big elephant in the room, or 2 big elephants in the room. Not to say that these players are elephants. It's just to say there's the elephant in the room. I'm using the metaphor here, okay? We're still awaiting the statuses of J.J. Starling and Donnie Freeman. These are 2 of Syracuse's most important returning players for the Orange next year. And we got to hope that at least one of them is coming back, because it's hard to imagine Syracuse building a tournament caliber team without one of these 2 players on the roster. And I really hope that we get clarity soon on J.J. Starling and Donnie Freeman. Are they coming back? Are they entering the transfer portal? This is more for Donnie Freeman specifically. Is he going to the NBA draft and not maintaining his collegiate eligibility? Hopefully we get that clarity soon, but to be quite honest with you, this could drag on for a while. We could find out in an hour from now. Actually, I'm recording this on March 25th at 11:39 a.m. Eastern. It's possible by the time you're watching or listening to this podcast, we already know the statuses of J.J. Starling and Donnie Freeman. But the transfer portal does not close until April 22nd. So they have weeks to be able to make their decision. Hopefully we find out soon, but I'm like you all. We're just all on pins and needles here, waiting to hear their decisions. And again, they don't even have to announce that they're returning. They can just return if they so choose. But I imagine we're going to get some sort of statement from them in the next hour, in the next couple of days, in the next few weeks. Hopefully we get clarity soon on J.J. Starling and Donnie Freeman. I should also point out that Syracuse also does have one more returning player, and that is Peter Mastorovich, who will be a true sophomore next season. So once again, Chance Westry enters the transfer portal. He spent 2 years at Syracuse. Unfortunately, injuries certainly took their toll on him. We wish him nothing but the best here on Locked On Syracuse. The Orange currently have 3 returning players left on the roster for next season. They also have 4 freshmen coming in. So that's where we're at right now with Syracuse and the transfer portal as far as their very own roster. But coming up, Syracuse is expressing more interest in players in the transfer portal. So stick with me here on Locked On Syracuse. The Armada Team of the Week is brought to you by our friends at Nissan and the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Each week, our Locked On college basketball experts are picking one team that stands apart, from top-seeded stars to the unexpected upsets. These guys showcase the strength and sheer power needed to push their team forward. And this team that we're about to talk about is a team that I actually picked to make the Elite Eight. So a broken clock is right twice a day with these bracket predictions. This week's Armada and clear-cut Team of the Week is the Arkansas Razorbacks. Despite losing their first 5 SEC games, Coach Cal's Hogs fought their way through the most rugged conference in college basketball to not only make the NCAA tournament, but knock off back-to-back national champion and Hall of Fame coaches and route to the Sweet 16. They accomplished all this without second leading scorer Boogie Flan for most of SEC play, and without leading scorer and rebounder Adu Thiero so far in the NCAA tournament. When it comes to the Nissan Armada, they say go forth and conquer, and that's exactly what the Arkansas Razorbacks have done here. It's clear that our Team of the Week is out here ready to conquer the road with confidence, just like you can in the all-new Nissan Armada or any of Nissan's outstanding vehicles. Take the Nissan Armada, Rogue, or Pathfinder and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. Syracuse Basketball has reportedly shown interest in North Dakota transfer Treysen Eaglestaff per On3's Joe Tipton. And ladies and gentlemen, Treysen Eaglestaff could be the game-changing transfer that Syracuse Basketball desperately needs to get back to the NCAA tournament. Let's talk about Treysen Eaglestaff, because if you are a college basketball nerd, you might have heard of this guy, okay? So stick with me here on Locked On Syracuse. All right? 22 other programs aside from Syracuse have also reportedly expressed interest in Treysen Eaglestaff, and they are all power conference teams, including, but not limited to, you ready for this? Kansas, Kentucky, St. John's, and Alabama. More on Alabama in just a second here. So yeah, Treysen Eaglestaff is from everyone's favorite basketball powerhouse, North Dakota. He is a mid-major player. And yeah, of course, Syracuse basketball is showing interest in him because it's pretty typical, right? Right? Of course, they're only going after mid-major players, except that those big-time programs are also going after Treysen Eaglestaff. So if those schools are saying he can play, guess what, folks? He can probably play at a pretty high level, all right? Here's why you may have heard of Treysen Eaglestaff. Treysen Eaglestaff scored 40 points this season in one game on Alabama, nearly leading an upset this season. So no wonder why Alabama is one of the interested teams in Treysen Eaglestaff. I mean, if you want to compare it to Syracuse basketball for just a second here, remember how the Orange were all over Naheem McLeod in the transfer portal just a couple of years ago because that one time when Syracuse played Florida State, he looked like Ralph Sampson? Remember that? Well, it's a similar type deal, I guess, with Alabama and Treysen Eaglestaff, except Treysen Eaglestaff is one of the best players overall in the transfer portal, one of the best scorers overall around the country. He scored 51 points in a single game against South Dakota State in the conference tournament. I understand it's the conference tournament for North Dakota and they're playing South Dakota State, but 51 points, my goodness. Let's talk more here about Treysen Eaglestaff, okay? This would be amazing for Syracuse basketball if they get him, but it would certainly be a challenging get. More on that in just a second here. Treysen Eaglestaff, 6'6", 190-pound guard with, I believe, 1 year of college eligibility remaining. In 2025, he averaged 19 points a game, 3 rebounds, 2 assists. He shot 42% from the field and 36% from the three-point line. He also had an Evan Maya defensive rating of negative 0.79. In fact, the only time that Eaglestaff has been a plus defender was in 2022-23 with a rating of 0.19. That being said, he is one of the top players overall in the transfer portal, so he is going to cost a pretty penny. However, he is not a center, and he also only, I believe, has 1 year of eligibility remaining, so that should lower his NIL value just a touch, maybe make it a little bit more affordable for Syracuse and other schools. I also would not necessarily say that the Orange are out on Treysen Eaglestaff just because schools with higher budgets are pursuing him, right? Alabama, St. John's, and Kansas. I believe Michigan is also one of those teams. They can all offer more money if they so choose, but those programs might not choose to do that. They might want to spend more money on other players, lowering the amount they can spend on a guy like Treysen Eaglestaff. So even though it's going to be a really competitive fight for Treysen Eaglestaff, I wouldn't necessarily count Syracuse out just because there are schools with bigger budgets that are going after him. That being said, you do not want to be the school that overpays for a player because chances are that player is going to end up being pretty disappointing, and it's got nothing to do with the player. It's got everything to do with the price that you paid for the player. For example, Coleman Hawkins last year in the transfer portal coming over from, I believe, Illinois to Kansas State was paid $2 million. He was not worth $2 million. The market said he was, one team. That's all that really matters. And lo and behold, he was disappointing from Kansas State, and Kansas State is wondering how come he's disappointing. Well, because you paid him too much money. So in the case of Eaglestaff here, if the big schools are not if Syracuse has to double what the big schools are willing to offer, it's probably a red flag. You don't want to be that team. That being said, it's not going to be an easy fight to get Treysen Eaglestaff, not ruling Syracuse out, but also not going to say they're among the favorites to get him. But they are certainly interested in this 6'6" scoring guard, and I think he would be excellent for Syracuse basketball. They are showing interest in him per On3's Joe Tipton. Okay, so with that, Syracuse basketball has now shown interest in 3 players so far in the transfer portal, and we'll run through all of them next here on Locked On Syracuse. Get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades, Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400-plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. You need help with an order? Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And for trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free Trade Master program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of steel professionals are already taking advantage, and now it's your turn. Join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the bracket breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
This is Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer. We ended last segment talking about how Syracuse has publicly shown interest in 3 players so far in the transfer portal, and I imagine that total is going to continue to climb over the next few hours, days, and weeks throughout the transfer portal process. So let's talk about the 3 players that Syracuse has reportedly expressed interest in. You got number 1, Kobe McGee, a Drexel guard or forward. He already has visits lined up with 3 schools. Syracuse is not one of them, so I do not believe Syracuse is a contender anymore for Kobe McGee. They are Wake Forest, Florida State, and Seton Hall per On3's Joe Tipton. The next one is Jakari White, a North Dakota State guard, and then, of course, Treysen Eaglestaff, a North Dakota guard or forward. Now, we'll count Kobe McGee for the sake of this discussion because until he technically goes anywhere, Syracuse, you can't necessarily rule them out, even though they haven't gotten a visit just yet. But all 3 of them have commonalities, okay? Number 1, they can all shoot the 3 ball at a relatively high level. All of these guys shot 36% or higher from the 3-point line last season. In fact, Jakari White and Kobe McGee were each 40% or higher. And that's good that Syracuse basketball is targeting guys that can shoot from distance because Syracuse was 13th in the ACC in 3-point shooting in 2025, and they were 11th in 2024. But keep in mind, 2024 had 15 teams in the ACC instead of 18 in the ACC. So that's why their ranking was a little bit better in 2024 compared to 2025. But regardless, bottom half in the conference the last couple of years in 3-point shooting. They desperately need to address that. So I'm glad that Syracuse basketball is going after some guys that can shoot the basketball. Also keep in mind, while Chris Bell didn't do a lot of things well on the court, He did one thing really well, which was shoot the three ball, and Chris Bell is now in the transfer portal. So at the very least, Syracuse is going to have to replace the three-point shooting that he brought. I think all three of these players that Syracuse has so far shown interest in, Kobe McGee, Ja'Carri White, Treysen Eaglestaff, can all shoot at a relatively high level. Number two, they can all play with J.J. Starling if he decides to return, or without J.J. Starling if he does not return to Syracuse basketball. With Kobe McGee and Treysen Eaglestaff, it's probably a little easier because you can put them at the three. They're each 6'6". That is good enough to be a starting forward in the ACC. That would leave J.J. Starling as the starting shooting guard for next season. Ja'Carri White is only 6'3", so you probably don't want to play him at the three all that often. However, there are two ways in which he could play with J.J. Starling. Number one, he still plays shooting guard next year, but J.J. Starling then becomes the point guard. That's not necessarily ideal. You could do that in a pinch, but ideally you would want a point guard that's a more traditional point guard, or just frankly someone that actually plays point guard compared to J.J. Starling, who's more of a shooting guard. Or you put J.J. Starling at the two and Ja'Carri White at the three, or Ja'Carri White at the two and J.J. Starling at the three. The point is it would be a small ball lineup. You could also do that where they would play with each other. If for whatever reason J.J. Starling decides to enter the transfer portal, and we're still awaiting word on that, well then, you got your replacement for J.J. Starling, because all three of these players could play the shooting guard position, and therefore J.J. leaves in the transfer portal. So they can all play with J.J. Starling and without J.J. Starling. Hopefully we have J.J. Starling back regardless. But it's important to point out that these are three players that certainly fit Syracuse basketball, or have the profile to fit Syracuse basketball. Whether or not they actually fit them, we'll find out with the results, right? And number three, yeah, they're all mid-major. I understand the concerns, but they're all highly rated transfers right now. They are three of some of the top players overall in the transfer portal. We'll use On3's rankings because they're much more up-to-date right now when you compare it to 24/7 Sports. But here are the rankings of the three players that Syracuse basketball has so far publicly expressed interest in. Kobe McGee is ranked 24th overall in the transfer portal. Treysen Eaglestaff, we just talked about him in the last segment, is ranked 31st overall in the transfer portal. And Ja'Carri White is ranked 36th overall in the portal. It's early, and there are going to be more players that enter, and these ratings are constantly going to shuffle around. But when all is said and done, I am willing to bet that all three players will rank inside the top 100 overall rated transfers, making them all pretty highly rated and highly sought after transfers that Syracuse basketball is going after. Now, whether or not they get them is an entirely different conversation. But all three of these guys that they're showing interest in have commonalities. Kobe McGee, Ja'Carri White, Treysen Eaglestaff, just to run through it one more time. They can all shoot the three ball at a relatively high clip. They can play with J.J. Starling. They can play without J.J. Starling. And they are all highly rated transfers. So that about does it for this edition of Locked On Syracuse, as far as talking about Chance Westry entering the portal, Syracuse showing interest in Treysen Eaglestaff, and the other couple of players that the Orange have shown interest in. As far as what is coming up here on the podcast in the future, tomorrow, and take it with a grain of salt because the transfer portal, things can change on a dime. There could be breaking news at basically any moment. But as of right now, the plan for tomorrow is to listen and react to Fran Brown's first spring football press conference. Very similar to what we did with Adrian Autry last week. Fran Brown, he did say a lot in that press conference. So if I have to make it 2 parts, even 3 parts, I will make it 2 parts or 3 parts, depending on how long each podcast goes. But I can assure you that we will listen and react to everything that Fran Brown said in that press conference. I wanted to do that podcast today, but then we got the news of Chance Westry combined with new interest with Syracuse in the portal. That's why we are going to push it to tomorrow. Of course, also later this week, there will be ACC squad, and I am trying to get on a couple of national insiders here to talk about Syracuse basketball in the transfer portal. We will see where it all goes. Thank you for making Locked On Syracuse your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the Locked On College Basketball podcast with Isaac Shade and Andy Patton. March is here, so be the most informed college basketball fan throughout the madness. And you can find Locked On College Basketball on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Folks, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening. If you like this podcast, be sure to hit that like button. If you really enjoy the podcast, be sure to hit subscribe and turn on those notifications so you know when I am dropping the next podcast. There's going to be a lot of breaking news happening over the next few hours, days, and weeks. So not only do you want to hit subscribe, but you want to hit that bell button so that you know right away when I am dropping the next podcast. And I will see you all again soon.